They believe their thoughts are entirely their own. They assume they're too intelligent to be manipulated, too conscious to be swayed, too autonomous to be directed. But Machiavelli would likely smirk at that illusion. Because genuine control doesn't appear forceful. It doesn't come from threats, aggression, or loud commands. It emerges through silence, subtlety, and precision. At its core, control resembles choice. It tricks the subject into thinking the decision was theirs, and that's what makes it so unsettling. True dominance doesn't come from overpowering others, it comes from understanding what they think they need. Then, you reflect it back to them, ever so slightly altered to support your objective. By the time they recognize what's taken place, the shift is already complete. This is the foundational rule of Machiavellian influence. If you want to guide people, first let them feel like they're choosing freely, because no one fights what they believe was their own decision. That's why Machiavelli never enforced his will outright. He steered, hinted, and let others walk willingly into the direction that best served him. Imagine you want to direct how a discussion unfolds. You don't confront. You don't issue demands. You pose a strategic question that subtly restricts the other person's choices to outcomes you've already engineered. For instance, would you say it's wiser to move now while the opportunity's still hot, or wait and end up working twice as hard later? No third alternative is presented. They believe they're making a decision, but every road leads to your intended destination. That's not deception, that's engineered cognition, the Machiavellian way. But to achieve this, you must apply the second rule. Establish the frame before presenting the facts. People don't necessarily believe the most truthful voice, they follow the most grounded one. The one who speaks with authority, who defines the context, who outlines the battlefield before others even realize a conflict exists. You walk into a room and say, "This is the course that aligns best with where the industry is evolving." Instantly, you've shaped the narrative. Anyone who challenges you isn't just offering an alternative, they're questioning the very logic of forward progress. You've already secured your ground before even making your case. That's how Machiavelli would command a room, not by volume, but by defining the frame from the outset. And if someone resists, you don't escalate. You apply the third rule, reflect their fear, then shift it. This is mental Aikido. Don't fight resistance or direct it. If someone fears risk, you acknowledge it, then guide it toward your preferred option. If you want them to endorse a daring idea, you might say, "I understand the hesitation. Anyone who's played it too safe has felt that same doubt. But the real danger lies in letting this moment slip away." Now, their fear becomes your asset. Because suddenly, not choosing your path appears to be the bigger gamble. This is how Machiavelli transformed resistance into momentum. Instead of confronting emotion, you redirect it. And once emotional momentum is working in your favor, you move to the fourth principle: make them believe the idea was theirs. Winning an argument isn't enough. You need others to protect and promote your idea as if it originated in their own mind. You don't dictate. You outline the problem, set the stakes, ask calculated questions, and then you wait. Let them talk. Let them uncover the route you've subtly laid down. Eventually, they'll say, "Actually, this makes a lot of sense." And it will be your solution, but now they've claimed it. And when someone feels ownership over an idea, they'll defend it with more passion than you ever could. Machiavelli didn't aim to build obedient followers, he sought self-driven agents. People who believed they were acting independently while in fact serving his blueprint. That's the most potent form of control, the kind that goes unnoticed. Because if no one sees the strings, they never question who's pulling them. Still, even that isn't enough. Ideas fade, emotions shift, and loyalty wavers. That's why the fifth rule is critical. Anchor their identity to your influence. You don't just shape their actions, you influence how they perceive themselves in the process. You make them feel wise for aligning with you, morally superior for supporting you, part of an elite group for standing by your side. You use phrases like, "People like us don't settle. That's why we act before others." Only those with true foresight seize the moment. This isn't just about giving direction. You're offering them a personal narrative, a badge of identity. And once someone embraces that identity, Their actions naturally align with it. No coercion necessary. This is how your presence becomes embedded in their psyche. They won't just recall your words, they'll remember how empowered they felt in your presence. And if that feeling was strong, certain, validating, they'll come back for it again and again until your approval becomes their internal compass. This is what Machiavelli would do today. Not argue online, not shout to be heard. He would walk into a room, lower his voice, and say very little. Because when you've mastered how to frame perceptions, direct emotions, implant thoughts, and shape identities, you don't need to control the masses. You only need to influence the one who leads them. And by the time they realize who's been guiding their thoughts, you're already in the next room, the next conversation, shaping the next choice without ever needing to force it. True control isn't about domination. It's about subtle infiltration. Machiavelli didn't storm into rooms demanding attention. He found the cracks of doubt, of longing, of self-image, and filled them until he became indispensable, all without being noticed. That's why his sixth principle is so powerful. Control the rhythm. Be the one who decides when things begin and when they end, because time itself is a tool, not a neutral ground. The person who commands the timing of a conversation, a deal, or a key decision is the one who controls the pace of thought. It shows up in the smallest gestures. He might pause longer than expected, prompting you to fill the silence. He might wait until you're slightly unsettled before making a decisive statement. He schedules meetings when people are distracted or fatigued, increasing the odds they'll agree with the voice that sounds most certain. By setting the rhythm, he dictates the urgency, the pressure, and even the illusion of choice. People don't usually go for the most rational idea. They choose the one that appears at the most opportune moment. Machiavelli understood that acting first doesn't guarantee success. Acting last, with precision and confidence, often secures everything. What does that look like in modern terms? You don't reply right away. You don't rush to correct. You observe. You let others reveal their positions. And when uncertainty creeps in, you step in with unwavering clarity. That pause before you speak, that's gravitational influence. Controlled timing, and your words hit like a verdict. Now, for the seventh rule, weave silence into your presence. Most try to dominate minds through constant speaking. But Machiavelli realized that people follow not the loudest, but the least predictable. The ones who can't be fully read because the unknown commands attention. And whatever you're paying attention to begins to shape your thoughts. He would sit quietly for half an hour while others debated, then pose one strategic question in. Just like that, the conversation would orbit around him. Not through noise, but through precision. That's influence in its purest form. Let others expose themselves through noise while you build power in stillness. If you seek to steer minds, stop filling every silence. Instead, craft an atmosphere that draws people in. Speak slowly. Embrace pauses. Hold eye contact just a second too long. Say less, but execute with absolute sharpness. You won't need many words once your voice lives rent-free in their heads. Now on to the eighth rule. Use your reputation as a smokescreen. Stability builds trust, so you craft a persona calm, consistent, deliberate. Perhaps you're known as the reasonable one, the composed one, the quietly capable one. But that's just the surface. Beneath that exterior, your strategy evolves. Because once people think they know you, they stop paying attention. That's when you move. Machiavelli perfected this. He appeared loyal until loyalty lost its value. He never had to lie. He let others create their own assumptions, then use those assumptions as cover. You do the same today. Let them categorize you, and while they cling to that label, you quietly alter the landscape. Your reputation isn't your true self, it's your disguise. When used effectively, it hides your intentions while they take root. Let's refine this even further with Rule 9. Influence the one others follow. Machiavelli didn't waste energy trying to win over the masses. He searched for the one figure who held real sway, the leader, the amplifier, the heart of the echo chamber. Then he would slowly, calmly, and respectfully build rapport. He'd ensure that person felt recognized, empowered, understood, and when the right moment arrived, he'd embed an idea so compatible with their identity that they'd advocate for it, convinced it was their own. That's how you influence systems, not by barging in, but by influencing the one holding the keys. Identify the voice that others echo. Shape that voice, and the rest fall into place. It's not charm, it's precision leverage. Now we come to the 10th rule. Neutralize resistance through shared imperfection. This is one of Machiavelli's most subtle but effective psychological techniques. When people perceive you as flawless, they become skeptical, guarded, resistant. But when you admit a minor, harmless flaw wound that humanizes you, they soften. Say something like, honestly, I overanalyze things too. It took me a long time to realize that. I've failed more times than I'd like to admit. This isn't exposing weakness. It's engineered relatability. You're not making yourself vulnerable. You're making yourself accessible. Once someone feels you're like them, their defenses drop. They open up. They begin mirroring your energy, syncing with your tone, embracing your ideas like you're co-authoring the story of their choices. That's the moment to plant the thought. It won't register as influence, it'll feel like genuine connection. But it will spread through their behavior, language, decisions until they glance back and realize they've become a reflection of your mental blueprint. That's the brilliance of Machiavelli's approach. You don't force, you attract. You don't instruct, you design. You don't dictate what they think. You create the conditions for them to believe they've never seen more clearly. And by the time they piece it together, you've already reconstructed their mental framework and vanished like a ghost. Real control doesn't feel like domination, it feels like clarity. That's what makes this kind of influence so terrifying. It doesn't crush the mind. It reshapes it until it willingly builds its own prison and praises you for the architecture. We're now exploring the deepest stratum, not surface-level persuasion, but long-term psychological infrastructure, the mechanics by which one person can shape another's cognition without ever shouting or leaving a trace. Let's proceed with Rule 11. Shape their future by redefining their past. People act not just from logic, but from the stories they tell about themselves. They want consistency between action and identity. And Machiavelli recognized that if you subtly reframe someone's past, you set the parameters for their future behavior. You remind them of what they did, but you reinterpret it. You say, you've always had the ability to cut through nonsense. Don't lose that now. You were brave back then. This is simply the next level. That bold move you made before, this is the evolved form of that same instinct. What are you really doing? You're scripting their personal narrative, shaping past decisions to appear as steps that naturally lead to your intended result. This is how resistance is bypassed. You make the choice feel like continuity of self. They think they're remaining consistent with who they've always been. But who crafted that identity? You did. This isn't mere suggestion, it's narrative control. And once you claim ownership of their story, you gain control over their next move. Now, on to the 12th, rule often misunderstood and misapplied. Don't reward with praise, reward with position. Most people try to secure loyalty through compliments, but compliments fade. They're generic, fleeting, and easily forgotten. Machiavelli would never depend on shallow affirmation. He offered roles that elevated people within the context he created. You might say, you're the only one I rely on for this. You notice what everyone else overlooks. Your perspective is crucial. You're the calm in the storm, that's why this is for you. That's not simple flattery. It's identity assignment. And once someone internalizes that role, they tie their self-worth to your perception of them. You've made your validation their mirror. And if you ever pull that mirror away, they'll chase it not because they admire you, but because without your recognition, they feel incomplete. That's how Machiavelli earned loyalty, not through material gifts or promises, but by giving people identities they were afraid to lose. Now we arrive at the most subtle yet powerful tactic, Rule 13. Influence by controlling what someone is afraid to lose. Every person harbors a deep-rooted fear, often unspoken, that silently guides even their most logical decisions. Machiavelli didn't uncover these by asking questions, she observed. He looked for subtle signs. What do they fiercely defend, even when it's irrational? What do they repeatedly mention without prompt? Whom do they envy or idolize? These signs lead to the true vulnerability fear of being irrelevant, abandoned, exposed, or just average. Once you identify that hidden fear, you don't attack it. Instead, you position yourself as the protector from it. You say, what you're creating here most, people won't recognize how rare it is. But I do. There are only a few people who think like you. That's why we're aligned. Others settle, but not you. What you're doing is rare, elite. Now, you've placed yourself between them and their greatest insecurity. Your presence becomes comfort. Your absence becomes threat. They become tethered to you not out of admiration, but because being without you would force them to face something they've spent years trying to avoid. This isn't mere influence, it's voluntary psychological captivity, and it's the crown jewel of Machiavellian mastery. At that point, you don't need to convince. You don't need to insist. You don't even need to show up. They'll monitor themselves, adjust their actions, and second-guess their words, all to maintain your silent approval. And it all began with something that looked harmless: a gentle comment, a measured pause, a light validation, a subtle nudge, a frame constructed with precision. That's the paradox of true control. It's invisible. It doesn't resemble restraint, it feels like resonance. They leave the room believing they're clearer, sharper, more in tune with themselves. They don't feel directed, they feel awakened. But the insight they walked away with wasn't theirs, it was yours. And by the time the realization dawns, if it ever does, they're already executing your vision, adopting your vocabulary, advancing your goals as if they were their own. Flawless influence leaves no trace. They echo your language like it's native. They champion your goals while believing they're defending their own ideals. They call it authenticity when in fact, their beliefs have been carefully sculpted, filtered, and refined by your design. This isn't just a theory. This is the Machiavellian method in action, and it doesn't require brilliance-only structure. The structure of cues, timing, identity, and well-placed silence. Now that you've internalized the 13 principles, the real question isn't whether you can control a mind, it's how long you can stay undetected while doing so. Because what comes next is the final phase, the maintenance layer. This is how Machiavelli made influence stick. The frame is already in place. The narrative has been rewritten. The emotional tone has shifted. But if you stop here, it could all unravel. That's why you anchor your influence through 3 silent cycles. Cycle 1. Anticipatory conditioning. You teach them to predict your approval. You don't need to monitor them anymore. They begin monitoring themselves. Before they speak, they hesitate. Would this align with what he values? Before they act, they pause. Would she handle it this way? You've become an internal authority not because you imposed it, but because you quietly attach their self-image to your viewpoint. And here's the key: you don't reinforce this bond with praise. You use absence, a cool tone, a longer pause, a moment of disengagement. Suddenly, they feel the imbalance. They sense a shift in the emotional frequency. And they scramble to realign not because of anything you said, but because they crave the equilibrium your presence once offered. That's not coercion, that's autonomous reinforcement. Cycle 2. Cognitive resonance. You begin hearing your phrasing in their speech, your analogies, your tone, your worldview. At first, it's faint. It's not force that's influence. The structure always matters more than the content. You don't chase control. You sculpt the environment until it flows to you. These ideas, they're yours, just spoken in a different voice. And each time they repeat them, their investment deepens. It becomes a loop. They reference you, share your insights, teach others the ideas they once learned from you. They're no longer just under your influence, they're spreading it. And once someone publicly identifies with your frame, they're unlikely to turn against it, because to do so would mean losing credibility, not with you, but with themselves. That's the genius of Machiavellian strategy. You get others to anchor their identity to your influence. Their sense of credibility becomes tied to your perspective. And now, without even knowing it, they defend your control as if it were their own. Cycle 3. Strategic dissonance. This is where you generate just enough ambiguity to ensure you remain essential, not through chaos or conflict, but by staying slightly out of reach. You allow them to feel like they almost understand you, but never fully. Your next action, your insight, your shift in direction, always feels just slightly ahead of them. That doesn't cause discomfort, it creates curiosity. And curiosity is addictive. You become the figure they're drawn to decode, the presence they search for when their confidence begins to shake. You don't grant easy access. You offer rare, refined clarity. The scarcity of full comprehension keeps them revolving around your orbit. No matter how composed or certain they feel in the world outside, near you they remain just slightly off balance. Not because you diminish them, but because you leave them feeling unfinished. And humans are wired to return to anything that makes them feel like they're evolving. This is how Machiavelli never had to resort to brute control. He made people dependent on the way he perceived them. He engineered the mental loop they couldn't escape because stepping away meant letting go of the better version of themselves that only existed through his lens. And this is the final, most profound Machiavellian truth. Ultimate control is when your absence causes disorder. When silence from you resonates louder than others' voices. When your approval feels like alignment and your distance is felt as a challenge. When your thoughts become the internal compass they consult with each moment of uncertainty. At this stage, you're no longer guiding choices, you're embedded in their operating logic. Whether it's a partner, a team, a romantic bond, or a community, they don't simply follow your lead. They depend on your presence to remain complete. They build plans around your worldview. They ask themselves what you would advise even when you're not around. They crave your input not for its volume, but for the clarity it offers beyond their own reach. And the instant you choose to speak, to re-engage, to offer validation, it won't feel like generosity, it will feel like the universe falling back into place. That's how Machiavelli would command the modern mind, not through allure, not through coercion, but by subtly becoming the framework through which they process reality. The hidden source of their perceived freedom, the silent architect of a world they never agreed to, but can no longer live without.